When stores start treating customers like criminals, society has already broken down. On March 15, 2023, Walgreens announced that it would be placing basic toiletries, toothpaste, deodorant, razors, behind locked plexiglass cases in over 2,700 stores nationwide. Not luxury items or electronics, but everyday necessities that people have purchased freely for over a century. The decision required customers to wait for store employees to unlock cabinets for items costing less than $5, fundamentally altering the basic social contract of retail commerce. Within 6 months, Target, CVS, and major grocery chains followed with identical security measures. Tide detergent locked away like jewelry, baby formula secured like alcohol, meat products monitored with electronic sensors. The systematic securitization of basic consumer goods represented the most dramatic change in American retail operations since the invention of self-service shopping in 1916. But this wasn't isolated crime response or temporary security adjustment. This was systematic recognition that the mathematical relationships underlying retail commerce had deteriorated beyond sustainable thresholds. When stores invest more in theft prevention than profit margins can support, when security costs exceed the value of protected merchandise, when basic commerce requires prison-level surveillance, the economic foundations of retail exchange have collapsed. Retail security measures operate as mathematical indicators of social and economic stress because theft patterns follow predictable progression during periods of systemic breakdown. Understanding this progression requires examining historical relationships between retail crime, economic pressure, and social cohesion across different civilizations and time periods. The mathematical foundation of retail commerce depends on theft rates remaining below sustainable cost thresholds. When theft losses exceed approximately 2% of revenue, retail operations become mathematically unsustainable because security costs, insurance premiums, and inventory replacement expenses eliminate profit margins. Historical retail theft rates in stable societies averaged 0.5% to 1.2% of revenue, levels that permitted profitable operations while maintaining customer convenience. Current retail theft rates have reached 4% to 8% of revenue in major metropolitan areas, levels that exceed mathematical sustainability by factors that make traditional retail operations impossible. These rates represent mathematical relationships that guarantee retail system breakdown, regardless of security measures or law enforcement responses. The progression from luxury theft to necessity theft follows predictable mathematical patterns that appear across all societies experiencing economic stress. During stable periods, theft concentrates on high-value, low-necessity items like electronics, jewelry, and luxury goods. These items provide maximum financial return while representing minimal survival necessity, indicating opportunistic rather than desperate criminal behavior. As economic stress intensifies, theft patterns shift systematically toward lower-value, higher-necessity items. Food, toiletries, baby formula, and basic household goods become primary theft targets despite lower resale values. This shift indicates mathematical progression from opportunistic crime to survival-driven crime, revealing economic desperation that exceeds what traditional economic indicators measure. Current theft patterns demonstrate systematic progression toward necessity theft that historically precedes broader social breakdown. When stores must secure baby formula, basic food items, and toiletries, theft has progressed beyond opportunistic crime toward survival behavior. Mathematical analysis of theft progression suggests current patterns indicate economic stress levels that exceed sustainable social cohesion thresholds. Roman retail operations during the empire's decline demonstrate identical theft progression patterns despite different technological and social contexts. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii and other Roman commercial centers shows progressive securitization of merchant operations during periods of economic stress. Basic food items, textiles, and household goods were moved behind secured barriers while luxury items remained accessible. Roman merchant records indicate theft rates reaching 6% to 10% of inventory during economic crisis periods, levels that made traditional commerce mathematically impossible. The securitization response created retail environments that resembled armed camps rather than commercial establishments, fundamentally altering social relationships between merchants and customers. Roman retail breakdown followed mathematical progression that appears universal across civilizations experiencing systemic stress. Initial security measures targeted luxury goods and valuable items. Progressive measures secured everyday necessities. Final measures required comprehensive surveillance and armed protection that made commerce prohibitively expensive while creating social environments incompatible with voluntary exchange. Pre-revolutionary France demonstrated identical retail security patterns during economic crisis periods preceding political collapse. Merchant records from 1788-1789 document systematic theft increases that required unprecedented security measures for basic food items, textiles, and household necessities. Bread shops employed armed guards. Cloth merchants operated behind fortified barriers. Basic commerce required security infrastructure that eliminated profit margins while creating adversarial relationships between merchants and customers. French retail theft rates during pre-revolutionary periods reached mathematical levels that made normal commerce impossible. Merchants faced mathematical choice between abandoning operations or implementing security measures that created prison-like shopping environments. The mathematical impossibility of profitable operations under these conditions contributed to economic breakdown that preceded political revolution. Weimar Germany provides contemporary example of retail security progression during hyperinflation and economic collapse. German retail operations during 1922-1923 implemented security measures that exceeded wartime precedents. Basic food items required armed escort. Household goods were secured behind barriers. Commercial operations resembled military installations rather than retail establishments. German retail theft patterns during hyperinflation demonstrated mathematical relationships between monetary debasement and social breakdown. As currency lost purchasing power, theft rates increased exponentially rather than linearly. Citizens who had never committed crimes began systematic theft of necessities as legitimate purchase became mathematically impossible through hyperinflation. The mathematical relationship between monetary debasement and retail theft creates feedback loops that accelerate both currency collapse and social breakdown. Inflation makes legitimate purchase more difficult, increasing theft. Increased theft requires security measures that increase retail costs. Higher retail costs contribute to inflation, creating mathematical progression toward commerce breakdown. Current American retail security measures follow mathematical patterns identical to historical examples of social and economic breakdown. The systematic securitization of basic necessities indicates theft rates that exceed sustainable thresholds while revealing economic stress levels that traditional indicators fail to measure. Understanding retail security as mathematical indicator requires recognizing theft patterns as more accurate measures of economic stress than employment statistics, GDP growth, or other conventional metrics. Theft represents mathematical relationship between economic necessity and social opportunity that operates independently of official economic measures. People don't risk arrest for stealing toothpaste during periods of economic prosperity. Systematic theft of basic necessities indicates economic desperation that exceeds what employment rates or poverty statistics reveal. When retail theft affects everyday items rather than luxury goods, economic stress has reached levels that threaten basic social functioning. The mathematical progression of retail theft follows predictable patterns because theft decisions operate according to risk-benefit calculations that reflect underlying economic realities. During stable periods, theft risks exceed benefits for most people because legitimate income sources remain available. During economic stress periods, legitimate income becomes inadequate, while theft benefits increase relative to risks. Current theft patterns suggest economic stress has reached mathematical thresholds where legitimate income sources cannot meet basic necessity costs for substantial portions of the population. The systematic nature of current theft, organized rather than opportunistic necessities, rather than luxuries, indicates economic breakdown that exceeds temporary stress levels. Organized retail crime represents mathematical evolution from individual desperation to systematic economic breakdown. When theft becomes organized, coordinated, and systematic, it indicates economic conditions that make legitimate income inadequate for substantial population segments. Organized theft patterns suggest social breakdown rather than individual criminal behavior. Current organized retail crime operates with mathematical sophistication that indicates systematic economic inadequacy rather than traditional criminal enterprise. Theft rings target basic necessities with distribution networks that supply underground economies serving populations excluded from legitimate commerce. The mathematical organization suggests economic desperation affects sufficient numbers to support systematic alternative commerce. The retail industry response to current theft levels demonstrates mathematical recognition that traditional security measures cannot restore sustainable operations. Store closures, reduced hours, and geographic service elimination indicate mathematical acknowledgement that retail operations have become impossible in affected areas. Walmart, Target, and other major retailers have closed hundreds of stores in urban areas where theft rates exceed mathematical sustainability thresholds. These closures represent mathematical recognition that security costs cannot be reduced to levels that permit profitable operations under current theft conditions. The mathematical impossibility of securing retail operations against current theft levels creates food deserts and commercial deserts that accelerate social breakdown. When legitimate commerce becomes mathematically impossible, communities lose access to basic necessities through conventional channels, increasing dependence on alternative sources that operate outside legal frameworks. This creates feedback loops where retail withdrawal increases desperation while reducing legitimate options, accelerating both theft rates and social breakdown. Communities that lose retail services face mathematical choice between traveling substantial distances for basic necessities or obtaining them through alternative means. Self-checkout technology adoption represents retail industry mathematical response to theft-driven labor cost pressures. When human cashier operations become mathematically unsustainable due to theft rates, automated systems provide mathematical alternative that reduces labor costs while enabling surveillance capabilities. But self-checkout systems create additional mathematical problems because they enable systematic theft through technological vulnerability. Customers can manipulate scanning systems, substitute products, or simply walk out with merchandise. The mathematical trade-off between labor costs and theft vulnerability often increases rather than reduces total theft losses. The mathematical progression toward retail automation driven by theft concerns creates social environments that further deteriorate human relationships and trust levels. Self-service operations eliminate human interaction while increasing surveillance, creating commercial environments that resemble automated prisons rather than community gathering places. Electronic monitoring systems, RFID tags, and comprehensive surveillance represent mathematical escalation of security measures that create commercial environments incompatible with voluntary social interaction. Current retail surveillance exceeds prison monitoring systems while creating psychological environments that treat customers as presumptive criminals. The mathematical cost of comprehensive retail security approaches levels that exceed profit margins for many product categories. When security costs for protecting $5 items exceed $5, the mathematical foundation of retail commerce collapses regardless of theft prevention effectiveness. International retail patterns demonstrate that current American security measures exceed what most developed economies experience during normal periods. European and Asian retail operations continue utilizing traditional open access systems because theft rates remain within mathematical sustainability thresholds. American retail security measures increasingly resemble those observed in failed states or war zones rather than stable developed economies. The mathematical progression toward comprehensive securitization indicates social breakdown levels that exceed what developed economies typically experience during peacetime periods. The psychological impact of retail securitization accelerates social breakdown through mathematical mechanisms that operate independently of actual crime rates. When commercial environments treat customers as presumptive criminals, social trust deteriorates at rates that exceed what crime statistics alone would predict. Mathematical research on social trust indicates that surveillance-intensive environments reduce voluntary cooperation and increase adversarial behavior even among law-abiding population segments. Retail securitization creates psychological conditions that accelerate social breakdown regardless of crime prevention effectiveness. Current retail security measures indicate mathematical recognition by major corporations that social breakdown has progressed beyond temporary crime waves toward systematic economic and social dysfunction. Corporate decision-making operates according to mathematical analysis that considers long-term pattern sustainability rather than short-term security solutions. When major retailers implement systematic securitization of basic necessities, their mathematical analysis indicates social and economic conditions that make traditional commerce unsustainable. Corporate mathematics suggests current patterns represent permanent rather than temporary breakdown of retail commerce foundations. The mathematical timeline for retail security escalation suggests progressive deterioration that exceeds what policy interventions can address through traditional law enforcement or economic measures. Historical patterns indicate retail securitization. Acceleration continues until mathematical relationships between security costs and commercial viability make retail operations impossible. Mathematical analysis of historical retail breakdown patterns suggests current American conditions approach thresholds that precede systematic commercial collapse. When basic necessities require security measures that exceed their values, mathematical relationships indicate society has entered breakdown phases that exceed sustainable social cohesion limits. Understanding retail security measures as mathematical indicators of social breakdown provides insight into timing and progression of broader economic and political disruption. Historical analysis demonstrates retail theft patterns precede other breakdown indicators by 12 to 24 months, suggesting current conditions indicate approaching systematic disruption. The mathematical inevitability of retail commerce breakdown under current security requirements means traditional retail systems will be replaced by alternative distribution systems better suited to high-theft environments. These alternatives typically involve more restrictive access, higher transaction costs, and reduced consumer convenience. Mathematical analysis suggests current retail security progression leads toward rationing systems, membership-based access, or government distribution systems that replace voluntary commercial exchange with managed resource distribution. Historical patterns indicate retail breakdown necessitates fundamental changes in resource distribution methods. When grocery stores started locking up everything, they were responding to mathematical realities that indicate social breakdown beyond what conventional economic indicators reveal. The systematic securitization of basic necessities represents mathematical recognition that traditional retail commerce has become impossible under current social and economic conditions. The mathematical progression from luxury theft to necessity theft to systematic organized crime follows patterns that appear universal across civilizations experiencing breakdown phases. Current American patterns match historical precedents that preceded major social and economic disruption with mathematical precision. Mathematical analysis of retail security measures provides more accurate indicators of social breakdown timing than conventional economic metrics, because theft patterns reflect immediate economic necessity rather than statistical abstractions. When stores treat customers like criminals, mathematical relationships indicate society has already progressed beyond sustainable social cohesion thresholds. The locks, cameras, and security barriers appearing throughout American retail represent mathematical acknowledgement that the social contracts underlying voluntary commercial exchange have deteriorated beyond repair through conventional policy measures. When basic commerce requires prison-level security, mathematical analysis indicates social breakdown has progressed beyond temporary stress toward systematic dysfunction that exceeds historical precedents for developed economy stability.